All right, our oceans, they are rising, whether you notice it or not.
In today's Facts Are Facts, NASA shows us just how much water levels have already changed in the last 3 decades.
Now, overall, satellites have measured about 3.5 inches of water in that time. Okay, that might not sound like that much, 3.5 inches, but it's already threatening coastal communities all around the world.
All right, take, for example, the Southwest Pacific, where water levels are rising faster than the global average. The World Meteorological Organization says low-lying nations like Tuvalu and the Solomon Islands are being swallowed by rising ocean levels.
Rapid sea level rise could decimate agriculture and homes in those communities. Overall, most places around the world can expect another foot of water on their shores within the next 30 years.
Yeah, and there are 2 ways to combat sea level rise. One is to prevent it by lowering our global carbon dioxide emissions. The other is to ensure that we're building with resilience in mind.
Yeah, and that's the mission our first guest is on. Alan Clinton is the Administrative Planning Officer with the County of Kauai in Hawaii. Mr. Clinton, thank you so much for being with us. We appreciate it. And we know you're one of the first countries to use scientific modeling to create construction and, counties to create this construction and planning regulations. Can you tell us about that product? I think it's called Sea Level Rise Constraint, and how you guys are using it.
Well, aloha, Stephanie, Jordan. Thank you so much for having me today. So the Sea Level Rise Constraint District is actually quite simple. It is a zoning region that requires folks to elevate their structures along the lines of future hazards. And I want to really highlight the fact that we are talking about using future modeling predictions rather than historic data. A lot of our previous standards that we use to help make our built environment more resilient use historic data, the FEMA flood program, our shoreline setback ordinance that requires structures to be located away from the shoreline. Those use historic data. And so we partnered with the University of Hawaii, and they created modeled scenarios for passive flooding and high wave runup. And we took all of that data, packed it into an Esri Instant application so that we could not only package this information so it was accessible and digestible, it really helped with the adoption of this policy, as well as general communication and passive education for our community.
So why did Kauai create this policy?
Yeah, so for the last 10 years, our community has been telling us through community planning efforts, our general plan efforts, as well as just knocking on our door, telling us that we need to take more decisive action on climate change. And so the Sea Level Rise Constraint District is one of our first efforts to do a comprehensive island-wide approach to prepare not only public infrastructure, but also private property to the damaging effects of sea level rise.
And have you guys already noticed some impacts that this decision has had?
Yeah, absolutely. So since we have adopted this policy, we've evaluated every single permit that comes through our department, hundreds over the last couple months against these hazardous zones, and we've begun to see a gradual increase in the elevation of structures.
Oh, okay. And how will this work with future structures, though? Will people just won't be able to build there? And what do you do with structures that are already there? I mean, you said some of them will rise, but is there anything else you can do?
Yeah, absolutely. So new structures in the area will certainly need to be elevated to these standards. And then any improvements that are over 50% of the value of the structure will also need to be elevated.
This is pretty cool. I mean, kind of talk about the idea about how technology is, working to help shape your policy. That's pretty cool.
Absolutely. So we realize that there is a whole lot of data out there, and we want to make sure that we have data-driven policy. And so the active work with these models is incredibly important. However, what I will really want to stress is that the really damaging effects from hazards associated with climate change are going to come from those natural disasters. These are our big floods, big rain events, or the lack of rain, or even hurricanes. So we are actively working with members of the scientific community to develop more hydrological models, atmospheric models, so we can simultaneously take that information associated with those major events and simultaneously bake it into our regulatory framework. This constraint district kind of let us know that we could take future data and bake it into our policies. And now we're looking for those new models that we can do the same thing.
We have about a minute left here. How do you anticipate this program evolving over time?
Yeah, so I think it's really in line with taking those additional models, the hydrological modeling, the atmospheric modeling. We realize that the consensus on sea level rise at the international level is pretty consistent on what we should expect to see in the coming century. But the consensus on atmospheric modeling and hydrological modeling isn't quite at that same level. And so we're watching the academic community and scientific community to see if we can support in any way. And then once those data are made available, we will hopefully take action and similarly incorporate it into our zoning codes.
Great. It's going to
Really
save
cool
a lot of
stuff.
structures on the way. Alan Clinton, thank you so much for your time. The Administrative Planning Officer for the County of Kauai. It just makes me think of, like, we're already seeing this in other places, like in South Florida and along the Gulf, having to raise, building height restrictions.
In New York, after Sandy, a lot of people raised their homes.
Now it's happening in Hawaii.
Yeah.
So good stuff.